Let me take you to a courtroom in Chicago, where silence weighs more than a gavel, and a 17-year-old girl dares to speak. She's not a lawyer, not by their standards. But when she steps into courtroom 403, armed with truth and a license they can't deny, the system begins to tremble. This isn't just about one woman being evicted. It's about every voice they've tried to silence and the girl who refuses to stay quiet. The courtroom was silent, almost too silent. From the cold fluorescent lights to the heavy wood-paneled walls of courtroom 403 at the Illinois Circuit Court in Cook County, everything felt thick, like the air had been waiting all morning to be shattered. The sound of low heels clicked against the polished floor. Heads turned. A girl, barely more than 5 feet, blazer, navy blue, curls pinned in a neat bun, stepped in with the composure of someone twice her age. Imani Wallace was 17. The row of senior attorneys lining the defense bench exchanged looks. One snorted, not bothering to lower his voice. "Is this take your daughter to court day?" Another chuckled, shaking his head. "She lost, sweetie. Halloween's in October." Then, from the bench, the voice of Judge Randall Whitmore rang out, smooth and cutting. "Well, this is new. A courtroom cosplay? Who let the AP government class in?" The gavel struck lightly, mocking. Imani didn't flinch. Her eyes didn't waver from the bench. Flash 5 years ago. 12-year-old Imani, sitting in the back row of another courtroom, same county, different room. Her mother was crying, head down, hands clasped in front of her belly like prayer. A man in a suit was explaining how she was 3 days late on rent. The judge hadn't even looked up. Beside her, Evelyn, Imani's grandmother, had knelt down, held her face close. "Don't cry, baby. Don't let them see your tears. You need to learn their language. You need to learn the law." Back in the present, Imani's face was calm, cold even, the kind of stillness that only comes after rage has already burned through you. She took a breath, then stood. "Your Honor," she said clearly, "I am the legal representative for the plaintiff, Ms. Tanya Mercer." The room erupted in laughter. Gasps. Even the stenographer paused, hands hovering above the keys. Whitmore leaned forward with something between amusement and disdain. "Denied," he said. "This isn't a summer mock trial program. Sit down." But Imani didn't move. She reached into her briefcase with steady hands and pulled out a folded document, sealed and stamped. She walked forward and handed it to the court clerk, who blinked in confusion before passing it to the judge. Judge Whitmore opened it and froze. A hush fell across the room. The certificate was real, official, issued by the Illinois State Bar. Passed at age 16. Signed, notarized, verified. Whitmore's mouth twitched. His eyes, just a minute ago full of superiority, now scanned the room as if searching for a loophole in his own reality. There wasn't one. After a long pause, he cleared his throat. "Very well," he muttered. "You may proceed." Imani nodded once. No smugness, no smile. She simply walked to the plaintiff's podium, set her bag down and opened it. Her back was straight, her shoulders squared, not with arrogance, but with purpose. Somewhere behind her, Evelyn sat quietly, hands folded in her lap. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't wipe them. Her lips curved slightly, not from victory, but from something deeper. Pride and fear, because her granddaughter had just stepped into the machine. And the machine was already watching. Cameron Price walked with the confidence of a man who had been winning cases longer than Imani had been alive. Crisp navy suit, silver tie clip, a practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. He stepped up to the bench, one hand in his pocket, the other gently holding a folder as if it were already empty of meaning. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "the plaintiff's case, while heartfelt, lacks the legal substance required for this court's time. This is, in essence, an emotional appeal wrapped in paperwork. We respectfully request dismissal based on insufficient grounds and procedural flaws." Judge Whitmore leaned back, fingers steepled under his chin, nodding along with a faint, knowing smirk. He looked almost relieved. "Well articulated, Mr. Price," he said, his voice low and judicial. "Indeed, the court must consider whether this matter should proceed at all." Imani remained seated. No objection, no visible reaction, just a breath. Then she stood, stepped forward, and placed her folder on the lectern with a soft thud that somehow carried across the room. "Respectfully, Your Honor," she said, "this case is not about emotion. It's about breach of contract. Specifically, a lease agreement that my client has abided by in full." She flipped open the folder. The first page was a printed email thread, neatly highlighted. "These are time-stamped records of Ms. Mercer's rent payments, each month without fail. You'll see confirmation receipts here, verified through her banking institution." She turned another page. Next, a side-by-side comparison of the payment schedule with the lease agreement. She continued steadily, clearly. Each point was delivered with surgical precision. No clause regarding tenant occupancy was violated, no late payment ever occurred. The eviction threat came only after Ms. Mercer raised concerns about plumbing repairs left unresolved. Langston, seated beside his attorney, leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, the smirk on his face slowly eroding. Price tried to interject. "Your Honor, we'd like to request verification of these documents before—" "They've been notarized," Imani said without missing a beat. "Pages 12 through 16, certified last week by Cook County Clerk's Office. Copies provided to opposing counsel." Whitmore's fingers tapped against the wood of the bench. Tap, tap. He glanced down at the paperwork in front of him, lips pressed thin. No dismissal, not yet. And that irritated him. In the gallery, the silence began to shift. The row of defense lawyers no longer snickered. A few began scribbling notes. A woman from the press, seated 2 rows behind Evelyn, leaned toward her cameraman. "Get a tight shot on her. Who is this kid?" As Imani moved through her final point, highlighting language in the lease that explicitly refuted the basis for eviction, the air in the courtroom thickened, but not with mockery. It was focus, attention, a quiet reckoning. Evelyn sat motionless, fingers clutching her worn leather handbag. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes shimmered faintly, the way only a grandmother's eyes do when watching someone she loves walk directly into fire. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It wasn't just about Tanya. Imani was pushing against something much bigger. And for the first time, the wall called Whitmore felt less like stone and more like something that could crack. The courtroom doors hadn't even cooled from the last slamming when the echo of boots against marble filled the hallway. 3 uniformed officers moved with precision, parting the sea of murmuring onlookers like a blade. "Imani Wallace!" one of them called out, voice sharp enough to silence the room. Imani turned slowly, clutching her case folder. Her expression didn't flinch. But the air around her shifted. The oxygen seemed to vanish as whispers broke out. "Is she getting arrested?" someone gasped. "Can they do that?" another voice whispered. Jeremiah Langston, leaning lazily against a column, watched with folded arms and a smirk painted across his face like a signature. "Smart girl," he muttered, loud enough for her to hear. "But this is grown folks' court. Welcome to the real game." The officers didn't cuff her, but they didn't allow a phone call either. Imani walked between them, her chin high, her blazer catching the late afternoon light. Cameras outside were already rolling. One reporter called out, "Is it true you falsified evidence, Ms. Wallace?" She didn't answer. Inside the interrogation room, the overhead bulb buzzed against the silence. The walls were bare, the table cold steel. Imani sat alone, her hands folded, her eyes unblinking. This wasn't fear. This was focus. Not a single tear, not a flicker of weakness. The door opened with a sharp click. A calm baritone voice followed. "I'm her attorney, and we're leaving." Benjamin Harris entered like a quiet storm. Gray suit, leather satchel, eyes like granite. He handed over a document and pointed to a paragraph. "Under Illinois Statute 725 ILCS 5/1722, this detention has no merit, no warrant, no supporting evidence. A single allegation from the defendant in her case? That's not probable cause. That's retaliation." The officer glanced at the paperwork, then back at Imani. Reluctantly, he nodded. "She's free to go." Imani stood without a word. As they walked down the station hallway, Harris leaned in. "You held your ground in there," he said. "But this isn't the last time they'll come after you." She nodded once. "Then they better bring something real next time." In the car, Evelyn didn't speak. She drove with one hand on the wheel, the other reaching back to squeeze her granddaughter's hand. It was small, quiet, but powerful. That night the house was dim except for the glow of the kitchen light and the blue-white flicker from Aaron's laptop. He sat cross-legged on the rug, his backpack open beside him, wires spilling out like nerves. "I backed up everything," he said, sliding a hard drive across the table. "Email logs, server pings, metadata trails, all time-stamped and verified. If they want a war, we'll give them one." Imani plugged it in, eyes scanning the folders like a surgeon studying x-rays. "They thought they were playing with a child," she said, voice low but steady. "They didn't realize they just threatened a system that remembers everything." She looked up, eyes hard. "This isn't just about Tanya anymore. It never was. It's about how many people like her got buried under fake papers, lies, and unchecked power." Aaron exhaled slowly. "So, what now?" Imani clicked open the first folder. "Now we make them wish they'd never touched the truth." The courtroom buzzed with forced civility as Judge Whitmore took his seat for the next session. The bailiff called the room to order. Cameron Price stood with his usual calm, holding a thick folder like it was the final nail in the coffin. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "the defense has uncovered new financial records. We believe this evidence shows that Ms. Tanya Mercer has been receiving unreported income through a company called Harmony Living Solutions." He passed the documents to the bench. Murmurs rippled through the room like a sudden gust of wind. Tanya sat frozen, her hands trembling. "I've never heard of that company," she whispered, her voice barely reaching Imani beside her. "I swear on my babies I've never—" "I know," Imani replied gently, her eyes already scanning the documents. Back at the Wallace home, the war room came alive. Aaron was hunched over his laptop, fingers flying. "Found the IP linked to the financial transactions. It's traced to a UPS store in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Guess what the office address is?" Imani didn't respond. She already knew. "A mailbox," Aaron confirmed. "It's a shell company." Harmony Living Solutions had no employees, no board, no physical footprint, just a rented address and a name built to sound official. Imani leaned closer. "Can you pull ownership registration?" Aaron clicked, paused, then blinked. "Holy hell! It's Langston!" He used a burner identity, but the digital fingerprint's sloppy. And get this, these documents were created using a paid template generator, the same one flagged by the DOJ last year for fraud potential. They laid the data side by side, bank records, IP logs, document signatures. One by one, the lies unraveled. Every deposit was faked, every signature copied, Imani said quietly. They didn't fabricate this out of ignorance. They did it because they thought they could get away with it. At the next hearing, Imani arrived early. Calm, measured, in her hand a single flash drive. She connected her laptop to the screen in the courtroom. The lights dimmed slightly. What followed was a silent autopsy. She walked the room through every transaction, traced the digital path of each deposit, displayed metadata trails, forged e-signatures, and identical timestamps. Impossible under real banking protocols. "This isn't an error," she said clearly. "This is architecture. Someone built this narrative from the ground up, not to find truth, but to bury it." She paused. "They did it not because they misunderstood the law, but because they believed they stood above it." The silence in the room was deafening. Then Langston exploded. "Ah, this is a damn setup," he barked, jumping to his feet. "She's a kid, a little girl playing lawyer." His palms slammed the table with a hollow thud. The room jolted. Whitmore hammered his gavel. "Mr. Langston, sit down. One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt." Langston slumped back into his chair, chest heaving, jaw clenched, but the cracks had formed. His mask of control was gone. Imani didn't flinch. She simply unplugged her flash drive and sat down. Then, Evelyn's hand gripped the wooden bench beside her, Her eyes had locked on something, or someone. In the very back of the courtroom, a man in a tailored black suit stood, unmoving. Eyes like ice, a presence that didn't belong, yet commanded space. Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. "Lucas, Harper." Imani followed her gaze. The name clicked. She'd read the files. She'd seen the rumors. And suddenly the game had changed. "They're done playing fair," Evelyn murmured. "Now, they play for keeps." The air in courtroom 403 was dense, as if every breath had weight. Imani stood poised in front of the projection screen, walking the jury and judge through a meticulous breakdown. She calmly matched the original lease documents, time-stopped, notarized, verifiable, against the doctored files Langston's team had submitted. Each discrepancy was clear, every forged page exposed like a peeled lie under bright fluorescent lights. Judge Whitmore leaned back, eyes narrowing, his fingertips tapped against the bench in a rhythm betraying unease. He opened his mouth, about to speak. The heavy doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. Two men in tailored black suits strode in with silent authority. One approached the bench, held up a badge, and addressed the court with calm finality. "Agents Keller and Ramirez, FBI. Pursuant to a federal warrant, we are placing Jeremiah Langston under arrest on charges of tax evasion, wire fraud, illegal eviction practices, and money laundering." Gasps erupted from the gallery. Tanya clasped her hands to her mouth. Even the court reporter paused, stunned. Langston's eyes darted wildly. "This is a mistake," he barked. "You don't get to do this. This is a setup." But the cuffs clicked behind his wrists before he could finish. The cameras, silent until now, flickered like lightning. Every angle captured his downfall. The great Jeremiah Langston walked out of his own web like a common criminal. Judge Whitmore said nothing. For the first time, his gavel sat idle. But the silence didn't last. Cameron Price stood slowly, smoothing his tie with mechanical grace. "Your Honor," he said, voice steady, "we respectfully file a defamation countersuit against Ms. Tanya Mercer. Her public accusations have irreparably damaged Mr. Langston's reputation." Outrage swept the room like a sudden windstorm. Tanya looked to Imani in disbelief. "They're suing me? After everything?" Imani's voice was low, certain. "They're not done, but neither are we." That afternoon, the sky outside the courthouse was a dark gray, the air sticky with summer heat. Imani walked alone to the parking lot, her steps sharp, focused. From the shadows between cars, a voice cut through the air. "You should have walked away." Lucas Harper stepped into view, hands in pockets, expression unreadable. "You're poking where you don't belong, little girl," he said quietly. "This isn't a school debate. This is the real world. Go home, if you still want to have one." Imani stared at him, her heart pounding, but her eyes never flinched. "I've met men like you," she said calmly. "You speak threats because you've already lost the truth." Harper smirked, gave a half shrug, and disappeared between rows of cars, his presence lingering like the aftertaste of fear. That night, Imani sat in the living room, her laptop glowing in the dark. Aaron's message popped up on her screen. "He's being paid through a dummy subsidiary of Harmony. Langston's off-book network found the chain. Money flowed from a shell account through Belize, then to Harper." Imani stared at the transaction map on screen, an elaborate dance of deception, papered in layers meant to stay hidden. The blue light cast across her face didn't reveal fear, only resolve. She typed back 2 words, "We're ready," then whispered to herself, "More promise than declaration. Tomorrow we push the button." Courtroom 403 had never been this full. Rows of spectators stood shoulder to shoulder, reporters, law students, retired judges, tenants in wrinkled uniforms who had once stood alone in front of men like Whitmore. Every camera was locked in place, every breath was held. Imani Wallace sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded in her lap, gaze steady. The silence was so dense it nearly rang. Judge Randall Whitmore entered from the side chamber. His usual swagger was gone. The robe seemed to weigh heavier on him today. He took his seat slowly, eyes avoiding the girl who now threatened to unmake his courtroom's power dynamic. Cameron Price rose first, composed as ever, holding another folder. Your Honor, we submit additional testimony and witness statements to support our defamation claim against Ms. Mercer. The damage to Mr. Langston's character. Imani stood. She didn't raise her voice. Before the court considers those claims, she said, I would like to introduce evidence that directly links Jeremiah Langston and Lucas Harper, the private investigator responsible for threatening me and coercing witness testimony. A murmur rippled through the gallery. She moved calmly to the screen, clicked a remote. A bank record appeared first, an offshore transaction to Harper. Then a recorded voice played. You back off, little girl, or we'll find another way to end this. Lucas Harper's voice. Cold. Unmistakable. She turned to the bench. Your Honor, this is supported by sworn testimony and digital forensics, and if the court would permit. A bailiff opened the side door. A young woman, pale and shaking, stepped forward. I was paid, she whispered, eyes darting to Price, to sign a statement accusing Tanya Mercer. I didn't know what I was signing. They told me it was about renters' rights. Her voice cracked. They gave me cash. Said it'd help. A long silence followed. Imani walked to the center of the room. No laptop, no papers, just her. If justice is something only the rich can bend, then it's not justice, it's currency, she said, her tone calm but cutting. If laws protect abusers more than the abused, they are no longer shields, they are weapons. And I'm here today not just to fight for Tanya Mercer, but to remind this court what the law is supposed to be. Not the language of power, but the sword of the powerless. She stopped. You don't have to hear it from me. Just look at who's not denying it. Cameron Price sat frozen. Judge Whitmore's gaze stayed on his desk. The room was so quiet, the HVAC hum sounded deafening. Finally, Whitmore spoke, voice rough, reluctant. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Tanya Mercer. The defamation countersuit is dismissed. Further investigation into Mr. Langston's dealings is underway. He did not meet Imani's eyes. Outside the courthouse, the steps that once echoed with mockery now stood in reverent hush. Imani emerged into the sunlight. Evelyn was there. She said nothing, just opened her arms. Imani stepped into them and exhaled. The cameras clicked, but the real moment passed between two generations of women who had waited too long to be heard. That evening, a headline rolled across every major news network. The girl who changed the law. A reporter asked, "What's next for you, Imani?" She smiled, quiet but sure. No one should ever have to stand alone again. The screen faded to white. The Justice Collective. Free legal aid, real change. And in a final frame, justice doesn't whisper anymore. It speaks through her. Justice doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it comes in quiet persistence, in the courage to ask hard questions, and in the refusal to back down, even when the odds feel impossible. This story wasn't just about a courtroom. It was about challenging what power looks like, and proving that integrity still holds weight in a world too often bent by money and fear. In the end, justice didn't need to shout because truth spoke loud enough. If this story moved you, if it made you think, made you feel, then I invite you to be part of the conversation. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, and let us know where justice matters most to you. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because stories like this, they're just getting started.